Think you know the story of Noah's Ark? Think again, because before the ark was ever built, before a single drop of rain fell, something happened on this earth so terrifying, so fundamentally wrong, that God Himself said He regretted making us. And it's hiding in plain sight, right there in Genesis chapter 6. 4 verses, one cosmic catastrophe, and a question that no Sunday school class ever quite answered. What actually happened before the flood? If you've ever felt like there's a layer to Scripture that most people never reach, you're right, and this channel exists to go there. If that's the kind of depth you've been looking for, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Let's set the stage. By the time we reach Genesis 6, the world is already ancient. Adam and Eve have long been expelled from the garden. Cain has murdered Abel. Generations have passed. Cities are rising. The human population has spread across the face of the earth. On the surface, progress, expansion, growth. But beneath the surface, Genesis 6:5 tells us something chilling. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every imagination, only evil, continually. That is not a bad generation. That is a civilization-wide spiritual collapse. But the real question, the question that unlocks everything in this chapter, begins in the very first verses. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Genesis 6:1-2. Straightforward, right? But hold on. Who exactly are the sons of God? Here's the puzzle. In Hebrew, the phrase is B'nei Elohim, literally, the sons of the Elohim. And every single time this exact phrase appears in the Old Testament, in Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, it refers to heavenly beings, angelic beings, not human beings. That's not an accident. And they didn't just visit. That word took in verse 2, in Hebrew, lakach, carries a sense of force, of seizure. This was not a courtship. This was a violation of a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. And then, Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Nephilim. The word comes from the Hebrew root nafal, to fall. Some translate it as the fallen ones. Others say it means those who cause others to fall. Giants, yes, but more than giants. They were the offspring of a cosmic trespass, a blending of two realms that was never meant to happen. Now, 3 major interpretations have existed throughout church history, and each one is worth sitting with. The first and oldest view is that the sons of God were fallen angelic beings. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text quoted directly in the New Testament letter of Jude 1:14, describes 200 angelic beings called the Watchers, who descended on Mount Hermon, bound themselves by an oath, and entered into unions with human women. Their offspring were the Nephilim. The second view holds that the sons of God were the godly line of Seth, Adam's third righteous son, who intermarried with the corrupt line of Cain. When holiness compromises with darkness, catastrophe follows, every time. The third view sees sons of God as powerful human rulers, tyrants who claimed divine authority and used their power to take any woman they desired, regardless of consent. 3 views. But what if we've missed the real story? Because here's what all 3 interpretations agree on. Something fundamental broke in Genesis 6. A line was crossed, a boundary God Himself had established between the heavenly and the earthly, between the sacred and the profane, was violated, and the results were catastrophic. And God's response? It was not rage first, it was something more devastating. Grief. Genesis 6:6. And the Lord was sorry that He had made man on the earth, and He was grieved in His heart. That word grieved in Hebrew is atzab, a deep aching sorrow, the kind of pain that has no quick resolution. The same word used when Job's friends saw his suffering and could not find a single word to say. God looked at what His creation had become, and He felt pain. Let that settle for a moment. Now you might be thinking, what does this ancient cosmic tragedy have to do with my life today? Everything. Because the pattern of Genesis 6 didn't end with the flood. It's a blueprint for what happens when a civilization surrenders itself to corruption, step by step, choice by choice. Notice how it begins. Not with violence, not with war, with the imagination. Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Corruption always begins in the mind, in what we consume, in what we call harmless entertainment, in the slow drift of what we normalize. Then it escalates to action, to violence. Genesis 6:11. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. That word for violence in Hebrew is hamas, chaos, lawlessness, a complete unraveling of the moral order. We are not as far from Genesis 6 as we like to believe. The question this chapter is asking every generation, including ours, is this: what are you allowing into the imagination of your heart? Because what lives in the imagination shapes the soul, and what fills the soul eventually fills the earth. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, do you believe the sons of God in Genesis 6 were angelic beings, the line of Seth, or something else? This is one of the most debated passages in all of Scripture, and I genuinely want to know where you land. And if this kind of deep biblical exploration is what you've been looking for, make sure you're subscribed, because where we're going next makes this look like the surface. Here is where the story takes a turn that most people miss completely. In the middle of all this corruption, all this violence, all this cosmic unraveling, Genesis 6:8 gives us one of the most powerful sentences in the entire Bible. 7 words. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. But Noah found grace. In a world that had descended into total darkness, 7 words changed everything. Now notice something crucial. The text does not say Noah was sinless. It does not say he was immune to the corruption surrounding him. It does not say he had special power or divine protection from the chaos. It says he found grace. In Hebrew, hen, unmerited favor, a gift not earned but given, not something Noah produced, something God extended. Genesis 6:9 adds, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Blameless in his generation, not compared to heaven's impossible standard,
But in the context of the most corrupt civilization in human history, Noah chose to walk with God. And that choice changed everything. Now here is the insight that shifts the entire frame of this story. The flood was not primarily an act of judgment. It was an act of rescue. Think about it. God could simply end everything, wipe the slate clean, start over without a remnant. But he didn't. He gave specific instructions. He preserved one family. He entered into a covenant relationship with one man. Why? Because even in his grief, even in his righteous response to the darkness that had consumed the earth, God never stopped being the God who rescues. The ark was not a punishment. The ark was a promise. And this is where Genesis 6 speaks directly to us, right now, today, because Jesus himself in Matthew 24:37 said something that should stop us cold.
For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. As in the days of Noah. What characterized those days? Matthew 24:38 tells us, "For in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark." Not necessarily overt evil on every corner, not necessarily open supernatural rebellion. Something more subtle and far more dangerous. Spiritual indifference. A civilization so consumed by the routine of ordinary life, so absorbed by the noise, the entertainment, the endless motion, that there was no room left for the reality of God. The still, small voice completely drowned out. And the Nephilim was still there, still impressive, still powerful, still capturing the attention of an entire world. But Noah built an ark. In a culture that saw absolutely no need for rescue, Noah believed rescue was coming. He didn't wait for the first raindrop. He built in the dry season, by faith, in plain sight, while the world watched and mocked and went on with its life. Hebrews 11:7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith. That is the climax of Genesis 6. Not the flood, not the Nephilim, not even the cosmic rebellion of the sons of God. The climax is this: one man in the most corrupt civilization on earth chose to walk with God. And God called that righteousness. That is available to you, right now, today. Genesis 6 is not just ancient history, it is a mirror. It shows us what happens when a civilization surrenders its imagination to darkness, when covenant is traded for appetite, when the sacred and the profane are allowed to merge and the boundary disappears. But it also shows us something else. In the middle of a world coming apart at the seams, one person's faithfulness matters. Noah did not save the world by being louder than the culture around him. He didn't win a debate. He didn't argue his way to righteousness. He walked with God, and he built. And when the rain came, he was ready. Genesis 6 leaves us with a question that is simple, ancient, and urgent. What are you building while the world is still dry?
Let me know in the comments which part of Genesis 6 hit you the hardest. Was it the sons of God, the grief of God, or the quiet, stubborn faith of Noah? I read every comment and I want to know where you're sitting with this. If this video opened something in you that you've never quite seen before, share it with someone. Someone in your life needs to hear this. And if you're ready to uncover more incredible truths hidden in the pages of Scripture, make sure you subscribe, because we're going deeper. The story isn't over. It never was.